Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics after an exciting week 4 that saw a ton of great football and the inaugural At the 55 Game Day live experience hosting the At the 55 Bowl, Mac versus Guelph, and so many amazing things I'm sure we're going to share from that day. And of course, we'll break down the action on the field and all the games across the league. But Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good this week. I have a lot of mixed emotions around the At the 55 Bowl because obviously it's my alma mater and it's something I picked Mac and I was all high on them and things. But then to see the guys that I coached in 2019, to see a guy like Spencer Masterson, an offensive lineman who was injured last year and wasn't technically a part of the McMaster win, finally get that hurt player of the game. So I'm a little conflicted, but overall, I'm very happy for Guelph and I'm very happy for another phenomenal weekend of football.
The human heart in conflict with itself is the epitome of drama. And what a dramatic week you must have gone through because, of course, some of these other games had us sweating, and it was just because of the heat beating down on us at Alumni Stadium in Guelph. We'll get into all those games, but we started off, as always, with our hardware going offensive, defensive, and special teams players of the week. Starting on the offensive end, Tom, man, oh man, it's not to be it's not unexpected when we see these things, but it doesn't make it any less special. Where are we handing this off?
Somehow, some way, the week 3 phenom. He did it last year. He's doing it again this year. It's our guy, Taylor Elgersma, 24 for 29, 385 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns, and then another 2 touchdowns on the ground, 4 total touchdowns against the #1 team in the land in the Western Mustangs. It's got to go to our guy.
And an illegal block, a blocking
And an
penalty
illegal
to boot.
block.
Yeah, you
And
can't forget.
I saw that illegal block on the stream. It was so late. He deserved it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we'll get into that game. And my gosh, can we for once pick a Laurier Western game right? I think we
Oh,
are
we're
we're
0-3 in 2 years.
it's brutal. Well, going from that matchup of two familiar teams to the most familiar teams that we've had in this decade, the Queens and Ottawa game, where defensive player of the week has to, absolutely has to go to go to one Keegan Vanek, defensive back for the Queens Golden Gales. A game where, as we'll get into it, was one for Queens on specials and on defense. And Mr. Vanek ends up intercepting the ball, pardon me, twice, taking one back to the crib, 64 yards in total, adds in a tackle and a half. But just with the amount of scoring that was done on the non-offensive sides of the ball in that game, just feels right that we had to give this kid a shout out. Some defenders on that Ottawa side had some good games as well. We'll get into. But Tom, we're not straying very far for our special teams player of the week, and we'll have to go through the tape. First time in a while, I'd gather, back-to-back weeks, the same young man.
I mean, how could you not give it to Ian St. Arnaud? He does it again. Another missed field goal to the house. This kid has been dynamite. And my God, you and I were talking about it, texting, going back and forth. It's not only that, oh, wow, it was a special teams touchdown. It's the point swing that instead of getting 3 points, you're not giving up 7. It's a 10-point swing, and he's done it 3 times now. It's unbelievable what this kid's doing.
Yeah, insert the Jesse Pinkman meme from Breaking Bad of how does he keep getting away with this? I hope this streak stops because they're hosting my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everybody's Guelph Griffins. Oh, and Tom, speaking of those Guelph Griffins, how about we start there for our weekly recap? Tom, the couple 1 o'clock games, Mac at Guelph. We were there super early for our game day live experience. So before we even get into anything going on the field, and we know that, it was going to be a learning experience and things that we're going to be so much more well equipped to do in the futures to come. And of course, if you were tuning into that, and if you're tuning into this, again, just all the love and appreciation out to you for the support. And we got to see a lot of great people there. What are your key takeaways? Like when you're thinking about this, we're a little over a day's distance at the time of recording from that experience. How did you feel it went for us?
I thought it went great. I mean, you and I are always pretty good at giving the energy and the excitement on the podcast. And to do it live, I feel like we were just cranked up to 11 with that. I was so excited and so happy. I know that there was some technical difficulties. I think the audio went out at a certain part. I know that when you look it up on the stream right now, the stream and the audio is mismatched a little bit. It's a little delayed. We have our guys working on it right now. So the folks who didn't get a chance to watch us live are able to rewatch it again. And my goodness, it's always so incredible to meet all of the amazing OUA fans that are out there. But to see people who come up to us, including one, Mr. Isaiah Smith's mother, who came up to us and said she loves listening to us, that made my whole day. Thank you so much for doing that. To everybody who tuned in to the live show, thank you so much for doing that. It really means the world to us. So as much as I want to say, yes, there are areas to improve because there's always areas to improve no matter what you do. I'm just so full of gratitude with not only to Griffin Football and Billy Brown for everything that you did for us, but to all of the people who listened to us, to everybody who tuned in, and to everybody who comes up to us afterwards at these games, before or after, just saying, I listen to the podcast. I love listening to you guys. I cannot thank you enough for all of your support so far. It has truly been amazing. So my cup runneth over.
It's a pretty surreal feeling. And yeah, the energy I think was so turned up to 11 that our guys at Royal Media, and of course,
Oh,
big shout out to them, and they captured video from the game as well that we'll be posting in the not too distant future. But we were so turned up to 11. They had to, I think, cut my mic because I think I was just being too dang loud. So again, things for us to work on. Tom, I don't know if it's confirmed that we can say it on the pod. We have another one coming up. Worth mentioning at this moment since we're talking about it.
100%. It's in the books. We are talking, and it is happening October 5th. McMaster homecoming against the Western Mustangs. We will be live and direct on the field for this one, which is going to be super exciting, breaking down all of the action in the OUA, just like we did, hopefully with a little bit more either tuning or just a little bit of a better experience overall, because we'll have one under our belts and we know what's coming here. But confirmed, October 5th, 11 a.m. Tune in. We'll be back.
If you're going to be in the house, bring your cardboard cutouts, bring your friends, whatever you got to do. Super psyched for that one. And that brings us to the matchup we had today, because it was McMaster in the house, the Battle Highway 6, the At the 55 Bowl. And for the second year in a row, Guelph comes away victorious. Final score in this one, 29-24. Tom, a tight ball game. Not quite as tight as that final score indicates. It was very much a last minute touchdown and then a bit of a maybe controversy is overstating it, but an onside kick that didn't go back to watch the whole game. It seemed like Mac was a bit perturbed when the referees declared it was a penalty of some kind, what have you. They would have had zero point 0.3 seconds to score from midfield. I forget the number of the midfield line, but never mind. But a game where we saw early on, it's tight. Mac actually jumps off to start the scoring. Nicholas Adair touchdown from Keegan Hall. Keegan Hall, and I'm going to save all the commentary for you because, you had some cool moments getting to meet some of his family when we were down there. And obviously, you've been at the forefront of talking about how phenomenal this young man is. And no less than on this day was he phenomenal, because it was superb, a superb game. It had me sweating a little bit, but maybe, again, that was just the heat. But we see Guelph put together a methodical game offensively, defensively, and just look sharp on this one. What are your opening takeaways when you look at this game?
Well, first and foremost, Keegan Hall's a real deal. I had the distinct honor of having Mr. Hall, his dad, come up to me and just shake my hand and say, "Hey, I appreciate everything that you guys are doing." It was an awesome thing to see. But Keegan Hall's my guy. 32 for 42, 379 yards against a very good Guelph Griffin defense, one touchdown and one interception, and I want to go into a little bit of a story here. Obviously, Zach and I watch a whole ton of OUA football, where a lot of the times we're out and watching these together. For the most part, we're always kind of on the same page with who the teams that we're picking. This past one, because it's the At the 55 Bowl, I'm the Mac alum, he's the Griffin alum. we I should preface this. I love this man so much. And we do our very best to make sure that it's always communal and it's always happy and fun and we're focusing on things. But it does peek through, the competitiveness peeks through because Keegan throws the ball, the receiver falls down, and it gets picked off. And you look over to me and go, "Oh, I think it's your boy 16 who just threw that." And there's part of me that wants to get down to a 3-point stance and let's go. Let's put on the pads and let's go again. But it was so much fun catching that game. But yeah, Keegan Hall is the real deal. And I really loved everything that he did. The last thing that I will say just quickly before we got into some things, you pointed something out to me before the podcast. And while I'm not able to show my real genuine reaction, I will say, how the fuck do you only rush for 24 yards? I hope that wasn't too loud for you. I was very surprised on that. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
I can't wait to see what the Spotify auto what do you call it, transcript makes of that, because that was an interesting audio experience. And all the right in the world to be upset about it. And you know what? My point about Keegan was twofold. One, the fact that we did see him go down a little bit before that. And so it was like, oh, there's been a pick. Oh, and it's Keegan back in. And also, again, like, he doesn't have many of those picks on his resume. He's a pretty sharp shooter out there. And again, some of the balls he was throwing out there had me, again, worried in this one. We saw what they were doing defensively over the last couple of weeks. We saw what Keegan was doing last week against U of T. Coming into this game, if they could get that run game going, then it made it feel like this could have been something. And of course, we didn't see that happening. On the other hand, though, for Guelph, for my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everybody's Guelph Griffins, under the tutelage of Mark Soria, who you've known for a while. I had the pleasure of getting to introduce myself, shake his hand after the game, and just what an honor that was. Seems like such an outstanding human being. We looked at, obviously, the excitement around this running attack. We were informed pregame, again, the fun thing of being live at the stadium when my former coach and your former coach and colleague in Coach Mike McDonald, the offensive line coach, he saunters his way over and we start talking shop, and he's telling us how he has his full stable of running backs, which again, from the perspective of where they were at last week, means that Donovan Malloy's back. So on the whole, you end up with Malloy, 7 carries for 64 yards and a touchdown. Tristan Aboud, 5 carries for 57 yards. Caleb Sargent, 5 carries for 42 yards. McCray with 7 carries for 29 yards. And though Isaiah Smith only had the 2 carries, and again, I think for now, we still have all the belief in the world that it's just working his way into the system. Like, I don't think we're starting to, throw red flags or red alerts of like, oh my gosh, did the injury do this, that, and the third? We're so far from that. But seeing, and you sent me the screen grab of Guelph posting it, the touchdown that happened in our end zone, a variation of a play we'd seen them do, a full house or diamond field backfield, 3 running backs, and literally we're talking at Laurier when we're watching them run that play successfully for a touchdown against the Golden Hawks, of being like, man, imagine when that's going to be McCray, when that's going to be Malloy and Sargent and Isaiah Smith, and those cats literally did the Spider-Man meme pointing thing. Like, it was too good to be true. And it's just, again, the weapons that Coach Soria has, and a great game from Tristan Aboud. Was 15 of 20, 144, a touchdown, an interception. So, maybe not great, but it was a lot more consistent. Some of those balls he was missing last week, and on some of the very similar plays, and obviously a much different weather outing on the day in terms of just sunshine and not a cloud in the sky versus the cold and the rain in Waterloo last week. And just especially on balls where he's got a guy coming over the middle and just hitting them in stride, versus last week seeing a couple times that ball's hitting behind. So again, offensively, they were looking good, but it took them a while to get rolling. And it was brought to your attention, though, that they weren't actually playing with a full deck of cards. Obviously, they get Donovan Malloy back, Isaiah Smith still getting his sea legs back under him. But as far as those weapons for an Aboud or for McCray, they were somewhat limited.
Yeah, and it's funny because we had an interaction before we actually started the Game Day Live with your guy and Alex Charette. As he came up to us, and we asked him about, hey, how's Willem Arsenault doing? And he kind of gave us a sly response. But I guess we should have asked the question, how's the entire receiving core doing? Because no Kane Stevenson, no Vashawn Janusz is in this game. And we walk out there going, oh, wow, what are they going to do? Willem Arsenault does a phenomenal job. 5 catches, 91 yards, and a touchdown. He looked like he didn't miss a beat out there in the passing game. But then you've got guys who I believe are first and second year players who step up and say, hey, you know what? We've got two of our star receivers who are down. Let's somebody else step up and let's make a play. Jared Tessier, 5 catches for 32 yards. Harry Vardy, 2 catches for 20 yards. Jacob Thomas, 1 catch for 12. Jacob Tessier, 2 catches for 10 yards. Like there is so many of these lesser known, I'll say, receivers for Guelph that stepped up in key scenarios and really did their thing. I was really impressed with the Guelph Griffin offense in particular. Specifically, shout out to that offensive line. We said it on the preview pod. I think we said it a couple of times here. That is one of, if not the best offensive line in the OUA. You know as well as I do, Scott Brady sends a ton of unconventional blitzes, whether it's either it could be a saw blitz with Sam and the Will, could be a Mac blitz, but they're coming from different areas. It's not just a straight up the Mac sitting where he goes and just goes into the A gap. There's a lot of stuff that happens. And I believe it's only 1 sack on the day, the entire time there. So the boys played absolutely outstanding. Shout out to the Griffin O-line and to my guy in Spencer Masterson for winning the Herd Player of the Game. But I was really impressed with this Griffin offense. They looked really good.
Yeah. And you know what? As far as other things that we discussed about these two teams that maybe we got some clarity going in, or not just these two teams, but a few teams, when we talk about best rivalries, and, our guy from Royal Media, Manny, him and, of course, his partner, Alex, in that endeavor, they're patrolling the sidelines with their camera. And it's after the game as we make our way down field level to chop it up and do a couple interviews afterwards, where when Manny's going along behind the Mac bench and it's late in the going, and these are physical teams, like this defense under Scott Brady, we know the guys out there, we've been talking about them. They're gonna make you feel it the next day, regardless of what the outcome is. And I don't know if we got the exact name, and I don't remember specifically, but I'm curious if anything he has is mic'd up. Maybe we won't share all the details, but he was saying he heard some choice words from the Mac bench going towards the Guelph side of things. And I'm sure Alex on the other sideline was hearing the exact same thing. All the more reason that when we saw not just the outpouring of the Guelph community there, but also all the maroon in that parking lot, in those stands when Keegan was driving, when we're seeing Mac produce effectively, when we're seeing them get the one turnover on the day, the interception for Braxton Peters, we're seeing that stadium come alive. All the more reason where there's that geographical nature to it. There's the rivalries that's been, especially in the last decade, you and I have leaning on our experience, that I just think that when you couple in also with Laurier and Western, because those teams certainly don't like each other. We'll talk about that one in two shakes of the lamb's tail. To me, this is still the rivalry. And again, even if the 29-24 final is a slightly misleading, no, this was a game where I feel like I, as a fan, went into cruise control a little bit in the second half, and partly just being tired from a long day already of kind of being on the scene and all these things and whatnot. But then there's part of being like, wait, there's just still like a lot of time in this game if Mac goes on a drive, and there's all the reason to think, again, with Keegan Hall, the snap of his fingers, he can make it happen. And, when he's getting the ball, like Nicholas Adair with 8 receptions, Devontae Hudson with 7, Jackson Cooling with 4. I'm going to come back to the Coolings in 1 second. Denkers with 3, Priester with 4. Like, he spreads the ball out so effectively that, yeah, there was a part of me that kind of just like, I let my brain go into just auto mode. And I was like, oh, wait, hold on a second. And again, had that touchdown been a couple minutes earlier, right? They scored at the end, and who knows? Maybe Guelph had cleared at the bench. I didn't go back to watch every single thing and see every single substitution. But the beautiful thing with Canadian football, right? It's never quite over until it's over. The last thing I'll say, though, I just got to go back to that point of mentioning the Coolings. We saw our friend in Jeff Cooling in the parking lot. And he was really sticking it to me a little bit about Mac coming to the house. And I think he pushed you on not just making the pick for Mac, but You were whispering a few other things to him over there, weren't you, Tom?
Yeah, he poked and prodded. He asked me how much is Matt going to win by? Not that if they were going to win, how much are they going to win by? And I was very bullish and said by 10. And obviously, very much not the case. Guelph really took care of business. Awesome to see him as always. But yeah, I wanted to add into that feel there because once again, through the phenomenal work of Griffin Football and all of the amazing people there, we were able to go out onto the sidelines as the game's kind of winding down with the rest of the non-dressing players. And so we're on the sidelines and like there's like 2 minutes to go or so. And like Mac drives the field and scores a touchdown. And I'm looking at you being like,
Wait a sec.
yeah, hang on. Like, we're on the field and Mac is like making a push here. It was like 3 seconds to go and they kick it onside. And initially, I thought Mac got it. And I'm like, am I going to be on the sidelines for McMaster to try to upset this here with like zero point 0.7 of a second? Now, obviously, that didn't come to happen. But yeah, of course, there's going to be like some jawing back and forth. We're directly beside the McMaster bench. It's all the non-dressing Guelph players and somebody's talking crap because it's a tight game. And like we said, we didn't, there's a rivalry game. I like that game could have ended a whole lot differently if everything kind of went together like that. Now, obviously, zero point 0.7 of a second left. It's only time for one play. You've got studs for Guelph. I highly doubt that anything would have happened there, but still, like, it got tense in that last couple of seconds. And you and I are on the field being like, huh, what happens if Mac pulls this off?
Oh, a member of the Lang Innovation team was there kind of next to us. Kind of looks at us, be like, wait a second. Hold on. This game's still kind of going. We're like, yeah, it is. And frankly, like it's a very short list of folks you would rather have the ball in their hand with zero point 0.7 seconds to be able to throw the ball half the length of the field to give your guys a shot anyway. So again, that though that action came late, which is where I just bring up that point that 29-24, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not beyond the pale to think that we could have seen. I don't want to think about it. I've already I played that scenario through my head.
Shoulda, woulda, coulda. Guelph takes this one.
I think I said the words that you and I would no longer be friends, but luckily it didn't come to pass. We're still as good as friends as always. For these two clubs, they both hit the road going into week 5 for major games. Guelph rolling into Kingston to take on the Golden Gales, a battle of 3-1 teams. And then for Mac, they're traveling to Carleton, a battle of 1-3 teams, which we made all the commentary in the world in the pregame show doing our live broadcast that I don't know if we've ever seen a better 0-3 team than Carleton was. They now go to 1-3. I can't wait to talk about that game. And obviously, we've seen a lot of great things with this MAC team. For them to sit at 1-3 as well, maybe ultimately just speaks to the caliber of football that we keep talking about. And there was a heck of a lot of talent playing football in Waterloo for our other 1 o'clock game where the Laurier Golden Hawks beat the reigning back Yates Cup champion Western Mustangs 43-28 to maintain their undefeated record and to knock Western down to 3-1. Tom, the commentary I mentioned to you when we first started talking today about this was watching that game after the fact. And of course, listen to Jack Moore and Deschamps on the call. I'm certain we'll talk about that, but it's a chef's kiss. Great duo there, and just Jack Moore calling games for Laurier is just so great. The feeling I had watching that game was that's what it looks like when you see other teams, other strong teams, go to Western. And frankly, we kind of even saw this with Carleton last week, and we saw it twice with Laurier last year, where you say, man, if it wasn't for that misplay or this misplay, or it ultimately comes down to this idea of like, if you want to beat the best, you have to play mistake-free football because they won't they won't make mistakes. They're not going to beat themselves. You can't beat yourself, and then you have to beat them because Laurier was so sharp on all ends and a few just mistakes here and there that we're not used to seeing from those purple ponies. It really is the Batman Superman he bleeds moment where it's just it's weird. Like we've seen Western lose games we've both been on the field where we've actually beat those Western Mustangs. I think we both
Mhm.
have winning records against them on our careers. Oh, sorry. We'll have to check the tape on that one. My apologies, Tom. We'll scrub that clean from the record. But it's rare that you see it where it's moments where it's like, oh, high snap over oh, like a penalty on like the called back touchdown. It looked weird. And again, it looked like bizarro Superman type world where it's like, that's not how that happens. Tom, what were you making of this one? We were obviously scoreboard watching. We actually had it going on your phone while we were watching the Guelph game and just not believing our eyes. What'd you make of the Golden Hawks taking care of business at home?
Really interesting because obviously there's a list of things that could go wrong in any game. Nobody is perfect, and certainly there's teams that could mess up in certain areas. But it was just so many things seem to be going against the Western Mustangs in this one. You and I both know Alex Berwick to be a damn good center, and his snaps had times were periodically over the place. There was a couple that were over Evan Hillock's head, which are very uncharacteristic of him. And then even in the first half, you look at what they're doing, and Jahari Hastings has an unbelievable game, and he has a forced fumble on the opening kickoff, which Laurier then recovers, or on the opening play, sorry, which
Yeah.
Laurier then recovers and takes to the house for the first score. Ethan Jordan then on the sidelines down for what 72 yards for a touchdown, and then you start looking at the offense, and it's like Evan throws a bomb to Seth Robertson that I thought was in, but the officials ruled that's out. And we know that Seth Robertson is a very good receiver, so typically he's aware of his surroundings and everything. But that's called out. And then they're backed up. It's like 1st and 17 or 2nd and 17, something like that after a penalty. And Evan from his own goal line loads up and throws a rope down to Braden Masseri for a huge gain and then called back because of a penalty. So that not only does that negate the actual play, but it brings them back even further towards their own goal line. There just seemed to be so many things that were happening where if both teams are playing at their very best, I still think that Laurier is the better team on this day, and I still think that they come away with this one. But there was a lot of other things that were also adding to the Western woes, if we want to call it that, for a little alliteration there.
Yeah, well, we see the return of Max Nixon, who we didn't
Mm-hmm.
see against Carleton, and obviously that's going to be huge. And on the rushing side of things for both clubs, as far as total rushing yards, Laurie ends up out rushing them 165 to 146 as a team for Western. And worth obviously noting, you got to bake into that. Well, okay, Western's playing behind nearly all that game, all that time, even though, of course, they're still able to bust out, 20, 50, like these chunk yardage plays on the ground. So for them, they're such a good running team. It's not quite the same that they have to go away from it, but maybe you bake that into it a little bit. And on the flip side, for Laurier playing with the lead, Tanner Nelms ends up getting the ball 16 times, gets 96 yards on the ground. Of course, Tayshawn Jackson with another touchdown to add on to what he did last week. You add in what Taylor did, punching it in twice. And on the other hand, like Keon Edwards, only 80 yards. Like it's again things that are weird to see. A Western team, like what was it going back however many weeks where they had 3, 4 rushers over 100 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And if that might be slightly the misnomer going in the other direction. Even like Keon has 80 yards, like 13 for 80, like no touchdowns, but most teams they're jazzed to have that. Maybe he punches in for one, but what have you, right? Then for the Keon Yazbek, of course, that fumble, it kills you, but adds in a 33 piece for your backup. You know what? Against a good defense, you take that. But it's just the standard that has been set, and rightfully so, over the decades with this club, that it stands out a little bit when you see it happen. But Max Nixon returning, still, I don't think we saw Kojo Odum back there in the secondary. And when I go back to, and you brought up this commentary, so I'll set this up and then pass to you of that 2022 national semifinal against Laval, where Kevin Mittal is, a Krite winner of the year, just doing just incredible things. And just to think, what kind of a difference it makes when you can say, okay, Kojo, where he goes, you go. And you look at Raiden Thornton, 5 receptions, 133 and 2 touchdowns. Sorry, Ethan Jordan's numbers, that is. Raiden Thorn, 9 receptions, 105. Laomi Ojatalayo, 2 receptions and 64. Like to be able to say, okay, can we limit one of these guys? And that's knowing you already have Richard Adu before. Like it's a spoil of riches. So like I'm not sitting here feeling bad for Western. And all the commentary at Guelph after the game was, hey, it's always a great day when Guelph wins and you know that Western lost. So but again, that piece of Kojo and not knowing his status, but again, you also felt a bit of a connection to that 2022 matchup with Laval. What was it that stood out for you that made you think about that game?
Well, it was the first game in a long time where I had seen a team take the few mistakes that Western typically makes and capitalize on every single one of them. Laval obviously had in that game, if you remember, they had their own struggles with snaps going over the top of Arnaud Desjardins' head, but ultimately, especially into the later part of the first half and certainly into the second half, they were capitalizing on every mistake, not even mistakes, but Western would go 3-and-out and have to punt the ball away. Immediately they score a touchdown again. And that just makes it drags on so much. And I really saw similarities of that game into this one, where exactly like you said, every single time Laurier had the opportunity, it felt like they went down and they scored a touchdown, or they took advantage of whatever Western was giving them, certainly. I mean, within two, like, let's call it 3 or 4 snaps that the Western offense actually has, it's 14-0 already in enemy territory, and your back's now against the wall. Now, for his credit, Evan Hillock still 18 for 31, 322 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 pick. Like, that's nothing to sneeze at. He's obviously a great quarterback. But when you're in that scenario against a Laurier defense that is obviously very clearly coming up and getting better and better as things are going here, it's a hell of a spot to be in when you are no longer in the area of, hey, let's get a lead and then just run the hell out of the ball, which is what Western does. As soon as they get a 1 or 2 touchdown lead, it's, hey, Keanu Yazbek, hey, Keon Edwards, how'd you feel about going for 150 yards each on the ground? Because we're just going to keep feeding you the ball. They get out of that game plan, similarly in 2022 for that Laval matchup, and now suddenly have to exclusively throw the ball, which limits their offense in a certain way. Once again, Evan Hillock is one of the best quarterbacks in the league in all of U sports. So it doesn't limit you in that standpoint. You have a hell of a guy throwing the ball, but the fact that you don't have a run game that you can successfully rely on, or at least rely on as much as you normally would because you're in a struggle mode to try to score points as quickly as you can, that just takes another facet away from Western, and it puts them in a spot where they are not used to being behind in the regular season or any time. Typically, it's they start off the scoring, they start off and getting up, and then they dictate the pace of the game. This time, Laurier came to play.
And I think there's a lot of ways you can spin things if you're a Western fan or you're on that staff to be able to say, again, whether it's the fact that you're still missing, because I don't think Keegan O'Neill was back on that O line either. I don't think I saw him. And again, what it's Kojo Odu missing there in the secondary for that defense, and just that whole notion of, Laurier, hey, they were on their P's and Q's on this one. We made some mistakes, and at the end of the day, we just did this thing with the Mac Guelph game. You look at that 43-28 game, and I think you're lying to yourself if you really know this team and just how this team's been over the years to say that, like, if you were to ask anyone on that Laurier side, when did you feel like this game was over? I think the honest answer has to have been, maybe not literally, given that the score was like a 2-score lead getting into the late stage of things, but it's really not till it's over with this club. But again, just to go back to how impressive Laurier was on the day, kind of similar to how I felt some of the commentary coming off of Guelph's loss at Laurier, where in the second half, Laurier opens up the scoring again. They go up 24-2, but then we get Seth Robertson with the 37 yards from Evan Hillock. Laurier responds right after that, and then Western's able to get a touchdown. And then Laurier responds again, and then Western responds. And then, by that point, you get another field goal, you get a late touchdown, all things like that. But once that, I have to imagine when that pass from Hillock to Robertson for the touchdown mid-third quarter to, make it 24-9, right? You're within a 2-score game at that point if you're really executing on the 2-point converts and everything like that. think my math is right there, but I don't know to be terribly off. As soon as they score that, like how you deal with that, how you just accept the fact that all right, it's time to go back to work and not think of oh my god, this is about to happen. They're going to go on a run because everyone who's ever played Western knows that it takes no time, and especially Canadian football, a two and out here, two and out there, whatever it is, a big return. And obviously, we know that with guys like Campanero and guys like Kabongo, Western can take it to the crib, returning kicks, just the composure, the ability to respond to those punches that were coming in the second half. Again, credit to how this Laurier team I think is evolving or how they're getting more mature. Obviously, we saw the penalty for El Grisman. As he said, it wasn't close. It wasn't close on that one. I'll be interested to see what texts I get to follow that up with when people in the Laurier area hear that. But again, just having an answer for everything Western threw their way was money. Tom, last thing I'll throw out your way. I'll keep it anonymous on this end, but of course, it was brought to my attention by someone. Whether we think our friend and a young gentleman we are fans of in Evan Hillock is if he's regretting any of the things he mentioned in our DMs upon seeing. There's nothing nasty in that realm. It was nothing like he said anything negative, perhaps, but just him being like, oh, I'm not the number one quarterback in the OUA. Saturday, 1 o'clock, I'll go and prove it. Taylor probably still holds the crown on this one, but again, no reason for Evan to go out of this one. I'm sure he's not happy with the day for Western. I'm sure he's going to beat himself up about it a little bit just because that's the competitor he is. But, does this validate in a lot of folks' minds that it really is it's Evan at one, and then it's Taylor at one, and then it's Evan at two, as opposed to, coming to this game, I'm like, I could see it being a 1A, 1B situation coming out of this one. How do these players rank in your minds, having seen them now duke it out in this iteration of the 2024 season?
I think the big thing that for me puts Taylor above in this regard is that not only does he have the arm strength and the capabilities to throw, but he's a real threat when he runs the ball as well. He doesn't take off and run a whole ton, but he is able to do so. Now, Evan obviously does the same. He does take off for 14 yards, and he's able to, or 18 yards total along of 14 yards in this one. And he's able to do something along those lines. But when I look at the two of them, I think Taylor's more of a run threat while also having the capabilities to throw the ball like he did. Now, I will say is that Evan Hillock is still one of the best quarterbacks in all of U Sports. Like we said before, he is the real deal here. This Western Mustang squad is better with him in it. There's part of me here that harkens back to even in 2014, the last time that Western has ever lost a regular season home game was with my McMaster Marauders, a point that was a huge high point for us and something that we still talk about to this day because it was such a massive deal for us. And even after that game, just to give you a proper sense of what the feel of the OUA is like with Western, we come back in and we sing a song and we're happy as all heck. And Coach Potasic looks at us. It says a whole bunch of things, but ends off with, hey, listen, there's a very strong possibility that we just poked the bear in this one and woke him up, but enjoy this win right now. We'll see him in the playoffs. Now, we didn't end up seeing in the playoffs because York Guelph Griffins had something to say about him.
You're welcome.
But in that regard, even when you beat Western, at least this is my experience. I don't necessarily think that Laurier is thinking the same way, but this was my experience of we beat Western. We got them in their own barn, which doesn't happen very often. The last time that it ever freaking happened, it's 10 years ago. And even then, we might have to play these guys later on. I think we just poked the bear. I think we just awakened some guys. So you don't get as good as Western is without earning some respect. And certainly I don't think that their season's over by any means, but more so turning the cadence over to Laurier. You did it. In the regular season, you did it. You got the monkey off your back. There is no chance you do not see Western again in the playoffs in some way. Maybe it's not in the Yates Cup. Maybe something else happens. Maybe another team is able to take them on. But there ain't no chance that Western is not making it. And I just know that fate is going to make sure that these teams play again. And what will your response be? How will you play against them? I am already looking forward to this matchup, but my goodness, Laurier, I hope you celebrated all weekend long. What a win.
And again, we could just never get this matchup right. So if it comes to pass that we're so lucky to get it again in the playoffs, I'm sure we'll just get it wrong again because we're certainly good at doing that. And if they did, Lori, that is, poke the metaphorical bear, that bear is going back to their den to cook up whatever plans they need to do in the bye week to come out in the second half of their season, guns a blazing. They'll
Mhm.
return in week 6 to host the Queen's Golden Gales. Laurier is playing in the Battle of Waterloo at Warrior Field with those Warriors coming off of their bye. Moving from our 2 1 o'clock games to our, oh no, this was still a 1 o'clock game. Schedule makers, you're starting to do that thing again. Carleton, U of T, Varsity Stadium. Final score in this one: the Carleton Ravens 42, the U of T Blues 12. Tom, this matchup I felt was kind of poetic in a few ways. Like the schedule, I'm going to go from kind of dissing on the schedule a little bit, and maybe all this is an accident. But we see 2 weeks ago, Guelph go to U of T and really, stick it to them. Right, they put up a crooked score on them. We see Mac last week; they host U of T, and they do similar things to them as well. We now see Mac and Guelph. We get that point of comparison. We see Carleton go to U of T in a game where we picked Carleton. We were favoring them. We're loving what they're doing offensively. My goodness, Elijah Barnes is no longer. I we're no we're not. He's not a backup quarterback anymore. He is the starting quarterback for the Carleton Ravens. And when Tristan Lefebvre is back, these will be interesting conversations they're having. But now seeing all these teams play each other and thinking about a matchup next week in Carleton and Mac, it's exciting. I'm getting ahead of ourselves here. But man, oh man, is this Carleton team good? Like offensively, we've talked about this now for 2 or so weeks. The fact that they put in this kid in Barnes and it's just plug and play. He's getting the ball out to Tristan Reddy 7 times, 138 yards. Ben Huckabone, Kasim Ferdinand with the 2 touchdowns. This kid Derek Cabot we're seeing in the mix for them. Matthew Morin crossed the 100-yard rank again, and Elijah himself 18 for 25, 292, 2 touchdowns, an interception, adds 46 on the ground. Just this team is gelling. We like the things they were doing offensively against Western. Like, I don't think this isn't a joke. And again, that 1-3 record is so far from what the truth is with this club right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you go back and you look at things, I think that Tristan Lefebvre is fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I don't know if Lefebvre being in means they win any of those 3 games that they lost. I think that it was just very good teams
Yeah.
that they've had to play against in the beginning parts of the season here because Elijah Barnes has played outstanding. You already read the numbers off, but finishing with 292 yards is fantastic in this one. And taking advantage of some of the inconsistencies, let's say, for the U of T Blues on this defense, I really, really like this Carleton squad in particular, because once again, you talk about how do you respond against certain adversities here. And even with obviously this scoring gets out pretty quick. The halftime score is 24-3 for Carleton in this one, but even it's later on, I believe it's in the later parts of the fourth quarter, and Toronto gets the ball back with a short field. They go down and they kick a field goal, and now it's 34-9. And certainly there's nobody saying, oh, maybe this is something, but they did score a point. Immediately after that, Keyshawn Reed, 107-yard touchdown return to really put this ball game out of reach. But to have that kind of a response immediately after your opponent scores, I think says a lot about you as well, and is another really great showcase of just an internal grit and a willingness to never give up in that setting, which we saw again in Western, where they go down 14-0 like that and still are able to come back and score some points. So I really, really like this Carleton Ravens squad. I think there's a lot of things that they're doing really well. I mean, anytime you finish with 500 total yards of offense, you know that you're doing something right. So I think that the sky's the limit for these guys, certainly. And I don't want to get into next week because we're going to do a preview pod, but my God, is that going to be a good game?
Yeah, and again, those two teams are kind of vying for that last spot in the playoffs. So again,
Hmm.
with Mac and Carlton coming around the pike, that's going to be super exciting. And this defense for Carlton as well, they're really playing outstanding. The big note I had going into this one was like the amount of speed on this field when you look at with obviously Chris Joseph and Jake Oseen on the offensive side of things for U of T. And again, I think we saw Jake Oseen in the MAC game go down for a beat, and I forget if it was him in this one or it might have been Chris Joseph, but I think they're both all right. So like, staying healthy because obviously those two are the heartbeat of this team. But really seeing, Ife Onyeka, and it's no surprise, but just the level of dominance he had in this game. He only listed with the one sack. I thought it was more than that. Maybe it's he gets the three tackles for loss, the forced fumble, where just like such a game wrecker, and to see him do his thing over there. This kid and Chris Tupin, who we've really been, on our radar after he was just what, like third in the province of tackles last year. Guys like Xavier Malone doing his thing, Schneider K. Phillip, who we've seen be a ball hawk this year for them as well, and just a host of guys they just rotate in there to be able to get it done. That's really making them exciting for U of T. Offensively, we see them trot out Scott Barnett to start this game. We saw obviously U of T makes either a second half or sometime in the second half switch to go from O'Donohue to Barrett. And his day, unfortunately, doesn't last pretty all that long. He ends up 0 for 4, interception, 3 carries for 32 yards, including an absolute truck stick of, I don't know who it was that caught him on the wrong day there, but he goes down. I forget whether it was upper or lower body injury, and we see Caleb return, and he ends up 17 for 26, 202 in the air, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So not a stellar day. But what do you make of just philosophically that they started with Barnett? Is this just a situation where maybe we were going to see O'Donohue enter the game in the second half, regardless, unless Barnett was just having an absolute game of his life? Or do you think Barnett going down is what brought O'Donohue back into the game, irrespective of what their initial plan was?
I think when taking into account our good friend, we talk about him almost every time, but Tommy Kanechis in this one, looking at this game plan, I'm more so thinking that Tommy, Coach Kanechis, sorry, Coach Kanechis saw something in that Carlton Raven defense that he thought Scott Barnett would be a little bit better to take advantage of rather than Caleb. I think that's kind of the mindset going into this one. Now, obviously, Scott does not have the day that anybody wants, and Caleb does better, but still having those 2 interceptions does hurt. The thing that I want to point out here is I know that you touched on the defense for Carlton here. Xavier Malone, first off, unbelievable game. 7 total tackles, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss, and a pass breakup. He really does his thing. But the thing that I want to call out here is that Carlton finishes with 9 tackles for loss, totaling 41 yards. If you have this Ravens defense, and they're very good regardless, don't get me wrong, but they are living in your backfield. It's difficult for anybody to make those kind of plays. Now, I'm not calling out anybody when I say that. I'm more so wanting to, pump up the Carlton Ravens rather than put anybody else down. But when you're in that scenario, and I'm sure Barnett and O'Donohue are running for their lives in certain areas here, it's always awesome to look at and say, let's hand the ball off a couple of times to get some yardage here. And Garrett Ellis does a fantastic job. 17 attempts, 105 yards, and with another 25 in the air. I thought he did a really good job of just giving this Toronto varsity blue squad a little bit of life in certain key areas, including that one long of 35, which was pretty electric to see as well. So once again, we spoke about it last week when we were talking about MAC versus U of T. There's flashes. There's flashes of greatness here. It's just going to take a little bit more time to put everything together for this U of T squad.
Yeah. And again, I think that was something that we were really interested in seeing is just how can they get a little creative on the ground game. Obviously, you read off how Ellis also getting a couple receptions using the screen game a little bit. We obviously saw in that Guelph game those just hitch screens to their receivers and just the way they're using the speed of Joseph coming over the middle if it's more of a man situation, and they know that he can just really turn on the afterburners and get going. So again, seeing it all come into play. So that first game, that first week with U of T and Waterloo, Rightfully so, Goss excited because those teams are in the same neighborhood, right? And so when you see a team against someone where you can say, okay, you can have a proper four-quarter matchup, and just the same for Waterloo, right? And know that it's not just flashes, but when you have an opponent who's dealing with similar things that dealing with and trying to build up some things on their team, that again we really see this team shine, and it'll only build forward. And again, if it is Caleb O'Donohue that they're just having to rock with as a result of injury or whatever their plans were, you know what? Again, you hammer home that whole idea of that it's not a white flag you're throwing in, but it's recognizing we build, we execute, and we look for the things that are going to become our identity as we move forward. Um, Tom, what else? Anything else on this one that you have? I mean, obviously for this Carleton team, again, I am just fighting the urge to start talking about that matchup they have next week. And for U of T as well, you talk about matchups in their own neighborhood. We got the Red and Blue Bowl, Argo Cup, Battle of Toronto, the Matt Dean's Bowl, as our friend Dakota Vine is now calling it. But anything else before we leave week 4 with these two clubs that we need to mention?
Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to kind of get into here is that while this Carlton Raven offense in particular has been doing great, and certainly Elijah Barnes, I really wanted to call out Tristan Reddy.
Yeah.
Tristan Reddy has, like, I don't want to say slowly but surely, but he has been getting better and better and better each and every single week, becoming more of a go-to target. Even Kasim Ferdinand, obviously, unbelievable wide receiver, second team All Canadian for a reason, and he makes some outstanding grabs. But with Kasim being that player that you have to make sure that you're accounting for, it lends itself to opening up things. And Tristan Reddy has stepped into that role immediately. You already detailed it, but 7 catches for 138 yards. He's becoming a trusted receiver and probably already was a trusted receiver, but we're really seeing it in the dynamic and the chemistry between Elijah Barnes and Tristan Reddy here. I love what I'm seeing from this young man. And the last thing that I want to mention from this Raven squad, shout out to Brandon Forcier. 2 for 3 on field goals, 5 for 5 on extra points for a total of 12 yards. Kickers are people too, folks.
Absolutely. And but you mentioned Kasim Ferdinand's production in there, and that touchdown that he had, the first one he had, the 3-yard bomb, it was kind of a skinny corner route, perfectly placed in the window, or maybe it was I forget. It was like they had 2 shots at it. They missed the first time, and then they're like, guess what? We're going right back to our guy. Again, I love how this offense is kind of dialing it up. We were saying beforehand, as someone who's, knew myself to calling plays and designing plays for some of the teams I'm working with, just seeing how easily they can just be like, all right, let's get it into their hands. Let's get into their hands. And they're playing this kind of coverage, or this playing this kind of fronts and things like this. And they just always seem to have a response for whatever the other team is doing. As we mentioned, Carleton is going back home to host Mac. U of T is staying at home to host York. And again, York, Mac, Carleton all going into week 5 at 1-3. And then we'll see what the tiebreak situation becomes between Mac and Carleton. But we'll get there on our preview pod for that one coming up later this week. But we still have football to talk about. So let's head to Ottawa, the nation's capital, where the Queens Golden Gales rolled in there and picked up their 8th consecutive win against Ottawa in this decade. It behooves the mind to wrap your head around that one or whatever, but them's the truth. 48-20. Tom, we said this on the preview pod. You had gotten word from someone close with the Queens program that they weren't playing Kasari in this game, that they were still resting some guys on their offensive line. And we thought that, okay, wow, what a matchup this is going to be. And it was a very interesting game. We'll obviously get to all these things. But after what we saw Alex Freakin do against York in a similar scenario where Kasari is a little banged up, they're resting offensive lineman, he goes off in less than a full game as well because he doesn't play the whole outing. And we think to ourselves, you know what? Okay, we're liking what we're seeing from York. We're liking some of those pieces. Here's the test for you because it's an Ottawa team that's strong across the board defensively, no more so, as you highlighted, to just validate what we've been talking about for the last couple of years, that in their secondary. This is the game where you don't have your guy at all in there, and you're going to have to go out on the road, take care of business, and be the guy to lead them to the charge. And you might look at that final score, 48-20, and say, man, he must have done something real special on the day. And I don't mean to say this to take a shot at him, but Vreekin goes 11 for 19, one touchdown, three interceptions, only 128 on the yard, 28 yards in the air. But this team still puts up 48 points. Again, just to speak of that, and Vreekin's the guy for them, right? And this doesn't devalidate or invalidate, I should say, what we know he can do. But when they were short guys and they can still do that essentially with limited offensive output, and we'll go over how they were scoring. We've talked about a few of those touch points on the Ian St. Arnaud touchdown, about the Keegan Vanek touchdown, these turnovers that they're getting, their special teams forces. Again, our guy Charlie Taggart dialing it up for them.
Mm-hmm.
For them to be able to do those types of things against, an Ottawa team that's been a bit of a disappointment this year, for us to say the least, at least on the offensive end, and you still go 48 strong, man, oh man, it comes back to that whole thing of like, you really have something special here if you can get healthy and you get it right at that quarterback position.
Yeah, it is the strangest thing in the world to see Alex Vreekin. I don't want to say have a drop off because you and I are positive people here, but certainly not playing anywhere close to what we were expecting him to play as. Um, the game opens up by our guy in Ian St. Arnaud with a 117-yard missed field goal return. But even just as a side note, that dude's conditioning must be outstanding because he's run like 400 yards or however much just in those. Well, probably 330 because of math, but still.
We're really showing our offensive line side here, being like, oh my goodness, that's a lot of running.
But the game gets started off with that. And then Alex Vreekin, they drive the length of the field. They find Nathan Falcone for a 7-yard touchdown pass. Great. And then Jeremy Hiscox with a 19-yard fumble recovery for the Gales. And then Ottawa, an interception return for a touchdown to make it 21-7. And so there's been 4 touchdowns scored, and only one of them is attributed to the offense so far in this game. It was just a very strange way to kind of look at things. And even like you mentioned, Alex Vreekin with 1 touchdown, Jaden Guzri McDonald, who had a decent game himself, 18 attempts for 88 yards. He has another touchdown. Ethan Dahl with another touchdown. That's 21 points from the offense in a game that ends up seeing Queens score 48. So while obviously you still attribute field goals to, I'm sure, the offense as well, it's just this Queens team, I don't think is playing to their full potential based on what they have on paper. Now, yes, they don't have certain offensive linemen playing. They don't have Jared Kasari playing, and that can certainly change things for the offense, sure. But I don't quite understand why we're not seeing more production out of Queens in their offense, and in particular, Alex Vreekin. I mean, in what, 4 games so far, he has thrown 8 interceptions. That is not typical of Vreekin whatsoever. And yet we're seeing this happen. And Queens is still a very good team. That defense is fantastic. Shout out Justin Pace. He's one of my favorite linebackers to watch right now. But it just doesn't make any sense to me why they're not doing better. I know it's a terrible way to kind of just word that, but I don't understand why this Queens team is not being more elite to where we think that they are.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like, when you have an OU MVP candidate running back who's not in there, like that changes everything. Like that's obviously like, that's going to be a huge thing, especially with the defense like this for Ottawa. To pivot a little bit, because we talk about quarterbacks and disappointments that we've seen this year, but to get to the Ottawa side of things, you mentioned the Jeremy Hiscox fumble recovery. It's a scoop and score on a block punt, which is now like the third or fourth block punt we've seen Ottawa give up, 2 of which being taken back for touchdowns. And again, never designed special teams plays myself. I don't know how much that you give up to, say, luck. You give up to just like, the snap was a little this or that, or whether, again, what I will do and just, again, say Coach Taggart calling up those special teams for Queens is just doing a stellar job. But that's obviously a bit of a concern if you're a GG fan. But we're really, again, just we're not seeing Miracle really stepping up and return to the form that we've seen him do. He goes 6 for 15, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and they pretty well pivot over to Josh Jansen, who doesn't do too much to really get you out of your seat, 5 for 10, 50 yards on the day. And, you talk about missing elements. We knew that this was a tough defense to be, doing anything in the pass in the ground game or anything like that. But King Charles Asselin, I mean, first time being kept under 100 yards on this one, 12 carries for 46 yards. The return of Suleiman Kamara, didn't realize he was injured, gets 9 attempts for 49 on the day. So, we look at again, you say how, well, for Queens to score that 48 and really not produce, especially in the passing game, the way that we know they can. For Ottawa, that 20 piece, you can kind of coming all in the second quarter there, you can kind of look in that and be like, well, that's a little bit interesting. And of course, it starts with that Patrick Cumberbatch 28-yard interception, pick six. And then on the very next drive, his brother Eric Cumberbatch picks off another one, leads, I believe, to, oh no, they don't score on that one as well. But again, it's two teams where, as far as the record books are showing right now, hey, Queens, you're sitting pretty at 3-1, tied with Western, Guelph, and Queens, and you're hosting Guelph next week. And then you have, pardon me, you're hosting, Guelph next week, and then you got Western the week after that. Mm-hmm. So that whole situation is going to sort itself out quick. So as a result, Queens, you better be getting healthy quick, or that can easily turn into you at 3-3, Guelph and Western continuing to climb in the ranks. And who knows, with that that Carleton team, as if they can pick up some steam and really chase them coming from the bottom up. But again, two teams that just really didn't get much going offensively on the day, yet somehow you score all those points. Tom, as far as the Charles Asselin of it all, like, what did you make of his game? Are you going to give that more towards the Queens side of things? Able to see, of course, that fearsome front seven that they have. You already talked about with Justin Pace. We know who those guys lining up in front of him are. Were the things that they were doing, do you think, that other teams hadn't been locking in on? Was it just the return of Suleiman Kamara and splitting those carries a little bit? Because obviously it's a step down, and he'd been on such a heater that maybe it makes sense. He was due for something a little close to earth. But what did you make of it all?
Well, I think that Charles Asselin and Ben Miracle at one point are dealing with some kind of injuries or something along those lines, because there's a point in time where I don't know if they were just sitting out because they needed something or not. I can't quite remember it myself. But Josh Jansen is out there, and the commentators call that out. And then the camera pan over, and it's Charles Asselin and Ben Miracle sitting on the bench at the same time. And you're going like, oh, this is not good, GG fans. This is less than ideal here. And we hope nothing but the best for King Charles. I hope that he is completely healthy. Obviously, 12 attempts. He does have something in this game, including a single reception for 8 yards. But I think in this area, once again, we are seeing the Ottawa offense that is struggling with the pass, whether it's Josh Jansen or Ben Miracle here, which is so strange because even last year, Josh Jansen was really doing some fantastic things in the air. So there's a lot of different things that are happening that I'm not quite 100% on with both Queens and with Ottawa in this run, but I want to attribute more of the Ottawa struggles to the outstanding play of that defense. Coach Ryan McManus and that Queens Golden Gale defense is outstanding at what they do. Obviously, we already detailed my affinity for Justin Pace. I think he's a fantastic player. But Darian Newell, 3.5 total tackles, 1.5 sacks, 1.5 tackles for loss. The dude was all over the field and in the backfield. Keegan Vanek, obviously, like we mentioned, 2 interceptions, one of them being a house call. But the total stat line on the day here, 47 total tackles for the Queens defense, 2 sacks, 5 tackles for loss. We have a forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery, 2 interceptions, 2 pass breakups, and 1 block. Like this is a very high caliber Queens defense that I feel this was the first game where they really showcased their stuff. Obviously, they did great things in other games, but in the second half of McMaster obviously comes back and makes that a very tight game. And you're starting to see, like, no disrespect to York, but York puts up 21 points on them. And you're looking around like, I can name off 6 players that have a serious contention for being OUA All-Stars. That's half of the defense. And we don't always see that same level of production. But in this one, we absolutely did. I think that defense played outstanding. So I'm happy to see that the Golden Gales on special teams and on defense are still firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, I mean, a year from now, we'll be watching Darian Newell on a CFL field somewhere across the nation. So, I mean, like, just what he's doing consistently and has done consistently, obviously, it speaks for itself. It's outstanding. Yeah, if Charles Asselin, if he's anything but healthy for this team, it's unfortunate because it's just not gonna go anywhere. Because I think we're getting to a point the same way, talking about with some of the other quarterbacks, some of the other players, where how much does kind of when you've established your priors and
Mhm.
then new information comes in, you have to weigh it against what you've seen. But at a certain point, that new information is going to be too great for the priors to hold strong. And I think we're at a point now, and man, maybe we underestimated like how good Nicolas Gendron was, and we thought he was stellar already. But right now, even with Charles Asselin, when he's on his game, we know that this is a GG offense that is still limited. And I think it's just at this point we have to say that this offense it holds them back. It's obvious. And again, with how good they are on that defensive side of the ball, it kind of stinks. Maybe that's going to give us some more fodder for our fun OUA potential trade games that we could play, where maybe you ship one of those outstanding defensive backs to another club or two, and then you get someone to help them out on the offensive side of the ball. But yeah, it's going to be tough for them at this point, and with the battle, the Panda game still coming up, and how good Carlton's looking, it's they're sitting at 2-2, which, as you said, if they had won this one, they control their destiny 3-1 and all that jazz. It's going to be tough for them. And, going into next week, it doesn't get any easier because they're hitting the road, going from one end of the 401 to the other under the golden arches to take on that team with the blue collar gold swagger and Don Cercelli there, just looking proud as all heck of his boys out there. In Windsor, of course. And for Queens, they're hosting the Guelph Griffins, right? And so for both these teams, man, oh man, is that a big challenge that they have going on for them next week? Tom, anything left on this one, or do we pivot into our final game?
Yeah, the last thing I guess I'll say here is that when you have those OUA MVP conversations, certainly that we get into, is it the best player or is it the person that means the most to this team right now? And I think right now, the person that means the most for Ottawa is King Charles Aslan. I
Yeah.
think that when he's out, that offense really is seemingly sputtering, which once again is very strange, especially when you have guys like a Maxim Elefana, Kerwin Geist, who are great receivers in their own regard. Maybe they're not getting the ball on a consistent basis, and that has something to do with their production, whatever. But I really hope for this Ottawa team that Charles is safe and he's healthy because selfishly, first and foremost, I am an OUA football fan. The OUA is better when he is in it. So I hope that he is doing well. On the Queen side of things, Alex Vreeken, I want to see more. I want to see more. Every single time I turn on the Golden Gales TV, I'm so enamored with. Oh, I want to see more. I just want to see more. I want to see this Queens Gales team play to their capabilities because I truly think that they have the potential to be in that upper echelon with a lot of these other teams here, but it ain't going to happen unless that quarterback finds his rhythm. So hopefully Alex Freakin healthy, mindset's back, not back, whatever it takes for him to get going here. I'm praying that happens, and I'm also praying for the safety of our King Charles Aslan.
Yeah, and again, it's not just Guelph coming up next week. It's Western the week following. It's Laurier the week after that. So it's real time. It's winning time, money on the table time, whatever you want to call it. Last thing, Tom, and I do agree. Obviously, Charles Aslan might be that MVP for the team at least. It might just be Patrick Cumberbatch because he's
Yeah.
scored more. He has more touchdowns in the last 2 weeks than their quarterbacks do for Ottawa. One in the pick six, the other in that strip fumble, whatever you want to call it. They didn't give him the forced fumble. I'm giving you that one, Patrick. Let's go to the final game we have of the weekend. A game which, unfortunately, we don't have the box score up for it, but we'll talk about it nonetheless because that's what we do. It was the Windsor Lancers coming off the bye and taking care of business in the Lions Den at York University. Final score in this one, Windsor 29, the York Lions 0. This is a game that a few talking points on here off the jump. We saw 9-0 at the half for Windsor with Danny Skelton back in at quarterback, the rushing game looking strong. Wavy Mamba went down at one point and it didn't look great. They had to kind of carry him off the field. Don't know his status or anything like that. That's obviously a huge blow for them. But when you can still have John and you can still like we know what that running attack is. And then the second half, we see them go to Corson Roy, starts to get some of those touchdowns for them to get to the 29-0 final. Tom, I was kind of joking with you in the preview pod we did live at Guelph on we've talked about this theme of when you sub players in and out, and unless you're the Guelph Griffins of 2024, revolving door quarterback play kind of frightens us a little bit. Yet the joke I made is that maybe Danny Skelton, he's dealt with this a few times now, so maybe that gives him some kind of ease of how to deal with it. But this is now 2 weeks, 2 games in a row. They had their bye last week where they end up pivoting to Roy, and for whatever reasons it were that happened, he becomes the guy making the plays for them, scoring the majors, and leaves us now going into a big matchup for them. We already talked about it. You have Ottawa coming in with that secondary and what they can do to not just shut you down, but turn it around and turn you over and score points. I haven't the slightest clue who maybe Nick Dubofsky will start next week for them. I haven't a clue. They took care of business. Again, Wavy Mambo, hoping he's healthy. We'll talk about the York of it all. But again, we just came off a game and York played a little quarterback roulette in this one too. But just coming off of the commentary of Queens and Ottawa of teams that need to figure out just what's what in the quarterbacking room and on the field. For Windsor, what do you make of this? They have such a good running attack. They have so many threats in the air. Jalen Miller, some of the other guys' whose names I'm forgetting, Javoni Cunningham and whatnot. What's going on at the quarterback position?
Obviously, we talk about how important quarterbacks are. Anybody who watches football knows how important they are. For those of you who don't follow football a ton, the offensive line and the quarterback are typically the only players on the field that don't rotate offensively and defensively. You'll get defensive lines who rotate in. You have linebackers who come in certain areas, obviously nickel packages for DBs and all of that, certainly with running backs and wide receivers. The quarterback and the offensive line are typically the only positions that don't change because you need that level of chemistry and that level of success in those two positions more than anything. With the offensive line, the chemistry that all five of those guys need to have is obviously what is some of the most important things there. The best players should play, certainly, but there's a gel that happens between everybody. Obviously, you and I both know the amount of double teams, the calls that we have to make. You have to work together with your guys, so it's very important that way. On the other side of things with the quarterback, everything starts and stops with the quarterback. Even something as simple as a different way to say the cadence can change things up. Maybe receiver motion isn't there. Maybe it's, Danny Skelton has a few of his favorite targets, but Corson Roy has another few favorite targets on that same team. It can change up the dynamic of an offense instantly. And so what I want to see from Windsor is make a decision and stick with your decision at quarterback. If Corson Roy is the guy, get him in there, get him started, and just get things going, because constantly switching up from Danny Skelton to Corson Roy, and I'm not discrediting the decision. I think Corson Roy coming into the second half was obviously what this team needed to get a couple touchdowns on the board and really put this one out of reach. But I want to see more consistency at that quarterback play. The rest of this Windsor team is so good that you need to have some consistency there. And if you can have that, you're really going to see great things. The other thing that I quickly wanted to call out is that finally we're starting to see some things. I saw in the first half, at least, Joey Zorn lined up to the left of Danny Skelton, and then Wegby Mumbo from the slot comes in and he lines up directly next to him. And then you have Joey Zorn who's going up into the flats for a potential pass, and then you have the option with Wegby Mumbo to hand that off or to rip it over. And that's where we're starting to see the real magic and the potential of this Windsor offense come into play. But you need to have consistency at quarterback first and foremost.
Yeah, and as a little inside baseball to some of the conversations me and Tom have that don't always make it onto the air just as a result of we're talking OUA football whenever we're having a conversation. We finally cracked the code of, I think, our finest fake OUA trade moment, which is if Tristan Lefebvre is healthy and able to come back this season, You send him to Windsor to be their starting quarterback, and then you figure out of the trio of backs again if Wavy Mambo's healthy, who you're sending back to Carleton. So you wake up that passing attack for Windsor with Colby Gidd, with Jalen Miller, Javoni Cunningham, all those dudes. You give Carleton on top of having Matthew Moore, and it's gonna make him better. This other weapon, and call it Wavy Mambo. And oh my gosh, do I wish there were actual such things that we could do as OUA trades, because that would be so cool for both these clubs. And we know that, well, I'm talking about Carleton. My bad. This is
Yeah.
York was on the other side of the field on this one. So let me pump the brakes on that one. No, everything you said about Windsor is true, and it's that much more frustrating, like what we said with Queens, where again, when you have all these pieces in place, right, and we'll start to talk about their defense by virtue of talking about York offensively a little bit now. When you have all those pieces in place, it makes you just that much more like, all right, come on now. Like you can do all these creative things, right? You can do all these things. You can now, run your different looks and have, to do like what we saw with Guelph, the three back system in the backfield, all these things, get Liam Talbot on some jet sweeps, Cunningham, so that's where it gets frustrating because again, defensively with what Coach Patrick Donovan's doing with his guys is outstanding. On the other hand, for York, right, and they get shut out in this one, and you mentioned it in the Queens breakdown, right? That's a nice outing. Them put up those 19 points in there, and just as simple as saying at times, how do we get the ball into Olay's hands and let him do work? How do we get the ball into Avante McCoy's hands? How do we get the ball into Melchus Alunga? And kind of similar that we've seen from U of T, using a lot of screen game. Because again, if you're gonna, and I think that there's a lot of reasons you can do that. We kind of use that example of, it's the money ball of it all. If you try to play Windsor Lancer football, right? They're gonna say, all right, let's just play like, hard nosed defense, run the ball a ton, and just beat them up football, and it'll pay dividends in the fourth quarter. It's like you're not built for that right now. Get the ball. You have some legit playmakers. Get it in their hands. Let them do their thing. However, much like with Windsor, it didn't net enough juice in the first half to change the course of the fate of Matt Lynn, who ends up getting pulled for Sean Law. Sean Law ends up getting pulled back for Matt Lynn again. I think which tells you about their long-term plan, where it's like, okay, let's get Law in there. It's only 9-0. Can he give us something to really come alive? And could we beat Windsor at home? Doesn't look like that's happening. Okay, Lynn's the younger guy. Let's get him back in there. Again, with what we're seeing with York, with how, like, again, a great defense they're going up against. And again, times where it's just like you're seeing them, we didn't see them get into the end zone or through the uprights or anything like that, but seeing, picking up first downs on a drive. And again, it sounds somewhat like patronizing, but just we've seen a few years of really poor football out of the York Lions, seeing just putting together drives, getting into their weapons, using the screen game, using some rollout options to get Matt Lynn or Sean Law off platform to kind of get away from that Windsor Western style football. What did you make of the things they were trying to do offensively, and how did you like some of what Windsor, we know what they can do defensively, but was there anything specific that stood out to you?
I think based off of what I saw from this York Lions offense, the thing that I kind of like from Coach Rick Walters is that I think there's still layers to his offense that he has that they're trying to figure out. Maybe they're not a power run team like he had with Matthew
Alberta.
Peterson in Alberta. Maybe they're not a spread offense, but they're trying both of those things out. There's flashes of things, a rollout style, a passing a screen pass. So there's players to this York Lion offense that I really am liking so far. I think they're just trying to find a rhythm, and I think they're trying a few different things on offensively based off of what obviously the defense is giving them to try to find their identity a little bit more. And I think that goes back to Coach Rick Walters, certainly. But it's still just going to take more time. It's just going to take more time, and trying to find your offensive identity against the Windsor Lancer defense, not exactly a fun time to be a part of there. So Windsor does their thing and obviously keeps York off the scoreboard, but still, once again, there's flashes here. There's flashes. The other thing that I wanted to come up with as well, talking about the York defense, but also kind of talking about the Lancer offense, is that when we walked into this, we knew, hey, there's controversy at quarterback. They don't really know who's going on or what's happening here. So you're going to rely on your running back, certainly. they come out and Danny Skelton in that drive, I think it was like 5 or 6 plays or something, he throws the ball 4 or 5 of them and just gets them out to his running, not sorry, to his receivers and gets the ball into their hands so that they're really able to do some great things. And something I don't think that York was necessarily expecting in this one, because obviously you've got 3 horses back there that you really want to try to lean on. So I liked the game plan, at least to begin with Windsor here and Danny Skelton. And obviously Corson Roy comes into the second half and really does his thing there. But that York defense starting to really be something here. Holding, regardless, Danny Skelton has had his issues, for lack of a better term, hasn't really had the production that we're used to seeing. But they kept them without a touchdown in the first half. And even afterwards, only 2 from Corson Roy to really get things going here. So I think that York defense under Coach Knox is really starting to do some good things here. And I like their setup going into the Red Blue Bowl next weekend.
Well, definitely. And again, no, I won't get ahead of ourselves. We're still in the week 4 preview or review. But yeah, I mean, with that Knox defense, the way they're bringing pressure, and for Windsor, they're on their bye. They're getting to watch, that whole Queens York game from last week and seeing, okay, look, something we were certainly talking about with whether it's Coach Knox, Coach McNeil, and vice versa for offensive coaches, a new situation. How quickly can you get into some of your more complex system stuff? And sometimes defensively, that means bringing pressure because, of course, you're bringing pressure. That changes up the responsibilities of other guys in coverage, so on and so forth, making sure you're still gap sound, all those things that get away from your base principles. York clearly showed against Queens that, okay, this is the Knox defense that folks are familiar with, that they know kind of he hangs his hat on philosophically. All right, they know that they're there already. And so in some instances, those things you were mentioning of seeing Danny Skelton early in the game, just getting that ball out, that felt like, again, great credit to Joe Cercelli of
Mm-hmm.
similarly in the way we looked at Coach Kanich's plan against Waterloo, an aggressive defense and saying, hey, look, I'm not gonna try and run into this mess. I'm not gonna try and pretend like I can protect and pick up everything to give our guy a good time for a shot downfield. Let's get some lateral movement going from our receivers. If they're in a man coverage, get them the ball, or just the screen game to get the ball a little quicker. Similarly with U of T against Guelph, those types of things where just again goes back to you're seeing the method behind the madness of what the OC's calling up. We're seeing all these weapons, and it just makes you go, just all right. There's this kind of crucial piece you got to still figure out. I mean, quarterback kind of matters a good deal, right? But if that's right, we know that this team is right. I mean, defensively, again, we don't have the numbers in front of us, but, we were kind of talking about how Kaladi, despite being the sack leader last year, hadn't really had that breakout game. I don't know the numbers this one, but much like what we saw with some of the other great pass rushers in the league this weekend, Ife Onyeka, Salas Hubert, Darian Newell, all these guys, he was causing havoc in that York backfield and leading to, at times, I think it was just the Robert Springer interception. But again, that guy is just wherever there's a ball in the air, he will find it and he will make you regret your decision. So again, much like with the Queens conversation, with teams like this, and it makes all the sense in the world that we're kind of talking about them in similar terms, that when you are teams that have those dreams of making it past that semifinal, Queens obviously was in the first 2 Yates Cups of the decade. But when you were so close to getting back there last year, you returned a lot of guys and you have so many good things going on for you. It's just one of those things where you have to nitpick a little bit different. They aren't in that category of winning isn't everything, that we had York, we had U of T. Maybe we should have had Waterloo in that mix as well. But again, these are teams where we're trying to see what are you doing in the regular season to get yourself in order for the big dance. And on like so many things, we're checking boxes, check, 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 check. But figuring out that quarterback, golly, is that not mighty important? Maybe we can craft up another possible fake trade, OUA trade to fix some of those other issues. Tom, again, we don't have the box score on this one. I will say that much like some of the other improvement we've been seeing from the York side of things, their game day broadcast is so much better than it was in years past. Like even just as far as last year, where they have like the one camera facing one and then the one facing the other, and just pretty blatant blind spots on the field where you just wouldn't see things. Loved the performance, the commentating of the team in the booth. Don't know their names. My apologies for that. What else on this game? anything that we haven't covered yet that is worth noting before we sign off for week 4?
Hmm. Well, quickly, shout out to Brady Lidster. He goes 5 for 6 on the day in field goals. He has been fantastic. Even though that Windsor offense, we're hoping to see a little bit more from them. We're hoping to see a little bit more production. As soon as you get to the 55, the dude's in range. So it's pretty amazing to have a weapon like that in that special team. So I quickly wanted to shout out that York fans. We spoke to a few of them when we were at that game live a few weeks ago. While yes, they're not, I don't think that anybody has outrageous expectations of this York team, but I still think that there's positives there. I think the faith is there. And I think going into a Red Blue Bowl is really going to be interesting with two teams that are kind of struggling in that regard and trying to find themselves a little bit. I'm really interested in that one. And once again, let's see a little bit more from this Windsor offense, in particularly at quarterback.
And as we mentioned already, they are returning back home to take on my Ottawa GGs. I'm going to keep with that until the bitter end of this whole thing. And then, yeah, the Red Blue Bowl, again, a situation where we might be able to see this team really just unleash everything, not have to pick and choose to say, okay, like if just run your plays, just go out there and just much like that Toronto and Waterloo game from week 1 that was so exciting on both ends of the ball coming down on the wire. So can't wait to set those ones up. Tom, wow, oh, wow. For all the reasons that every week in the OUA is so exciting, no, it's hard to think that I won't be remembering this one for the opportunity we got at Guelph. Again, huge shout out to the Lang Innovation team for allowing us to use the space in the parking lot. Again, the way they do the pregame tailgate there is so professional. And also we learned being there, they now have full license for alcohol sales in the whole stadium. So much like we saw at York, starting to see perhaps a new leaf change there, which I think not as a way of promoting alcohol consumption, but in being realistic, which is how people like to get down when they go to a football game. It's just saying, okay, let's just make this an experience that's great for all. Of course, we saw the Guelph Griffins unveil their wall of honor, which was superb. Really cool moment for me, especially just looking through some of those names there. But an outstanding week of football, a really cool moment for us at Guelph. Of course, shout out again, Alex and Manny, Royal Media, who, we wouldn't have been able to do that and so many other things we've been able to do in the last half a year, even just working with them. That's really, I think, taken our game to a whole new level. Tom, any last thoughts on the week before we send it off?
Once again, just gratitude for all of the folks who tuned in, everybody who helped us in getting this production, this game day live experience off the ground and running. I can't believe we already have the second one planned and ready to go. And I am very, very excited to see the future of a lot of these teams here. In particular, can't wait already to see Western and how they come back after this big loss going into the bye week and then coming back out. I guess some pretty big teams as well. Really, what a weekend of football in this one.
And of course, as we hit to week 5, we're truly getting into the halfway point of the season. We might play around with some additional content that will be coming your way, but you're getting the preview pod from us later this week, right here at the 55.